You're listening to the 14th Source for all geeky and nerdy news and discussion, which means that you're listening to a podcast.
For all intents and purposes.
I am D. Bethel.
And I'm Andrew Asplund.
And we are your two overeducated, codependent nerd hosts, bringing you the things that we like to talk about, but filtered through inquisitive and critical lenses. In the episode for Friday, January 20th, 2023. Wait, is that right? January 20th? I feel like we've only, you and I have only done 2 episodes of the year, and January's almost over. Wow.
I mean, yeah, we've only done 2.
That's true. Yeah.
That's how the calendar works?
Yeah, I guess, yeah. There's Chiron at the beginning, yeah.
Oh, no, we didn't actually do. You're right. Oh, someone phoned in an episode. That was me, actually.
I was going to say. And maybe we should do that again. We got a lot more YouTube subscribers out of the deal. It sounds like a good deal.
Apparently, when I'm not here, the episode does much better.
Let me do the intro again. Kyron Silva of Taurus Comics and the Four Tales podcast proudly presents a podcast for all intents and purposes. I'm D. Maybe if we just keep saying that he's a part of the show, we'll become the biggest podcast on the planet. But, I mean, we're not looking for that. So, speaking of larger audiences, it doesn't seem like, just a quick look into this, obviously we could probably go deeper. Since last week, things have not gotten better, or I guess worse, with the whole Dungeons & Dragons OGL thing.
No, it has not gotten worse.
They still haven't released it?
So, as of Wednesday of this week, so January 18th, they did actually have an announcement where they said they're going to release something by the 20th, the day this episode releases.
Oh, interesting.
And they're going to have a survey to see what people think about it.
I wonder if it was like those surveys that people got sent during, not to make a political, during Trump's survey, where it's like, how would you rate President Trump's presidency? The best ever,
the
awesome,
bestest ever,
or great.
Yeah.
No bad option. It's like, what do you think of modifying the OGL? It'd be great. It'd be fantastic. I'd be okay with it. And just know, everything you propose is hot garbage. Why are you doing this in the first place?
Yeah, it's... And actually, to that end, there was actually a purported leak that suggested that was exactly the point, right? That, no one at Wizards gives a shit about the surveys. They're all garbage. That's probably not true. I don't know.
Not everybody that works at Wizards of the Coast is bad, right?
Right, of course
it just seems like the people in charge seem to be making very questionable decisions.
But it is this just very, frustrating, maybe a lot of people think that you're not worth the second or third or fourth chance to, right? I think that's the real thing. Hey, look, we've had the third guy from HR or from marketing try to respond to this. Hope you like him. I mean, actually, what I do love about the post they did this week was that it was a dude's name. It was Kyle, right? Everyone's like, oh, Kyle, welcome aboard. I assume you're new, right? Is right. Hoping you're still here in 6 months.
How does it feel to be immolated by your employer?
Right. You're the guy that was clearly you were hired to deal with the problem.
Could be thrown to the wolves. Yeah. Well, if they do release something on the 20th today, we'll probably be talking about it next week in some shape or form. Whether it takes a whole episode or not, we'll see how bad it is.
I don't want to give this company any more of my airtime.
Fair enough. Well, speaking of airtime, there was about 8 weeks there where a new television show. Is it a television show? I guess it's on televisions, but it's not airing in network TV.
It is, in fact, on both your and my television. So that is televisions.
A new show that I know I was looking forward to quite a bit aired on Disney Plus, or was released on Disney Plus. And now that the season has gone through and we've had some time to think about it, Andrew and I wanted to get together and talk about the Disney Plus show, Willow.
This is actually, I think, my perspective, how I want to start with this and how I want to address this show is I have zero investment in the original Willow, right? Like, I actually don't. I remember watching it for the first time in my late teens and being like, someone convincing me, oh, you have to watch this. And I was like, oof, okay. It wasn't my thing.
Right. Nobody's perfect.
But when this show started, I think I've actually said on this podcast, the first episode, I was like, wow, actually, I think I like this. Like, I like what it's doing, after the first episode. So here I am to say, hey, it's all right. This is a show that has big, this is someone's D&D campaign energy.
Wait, explain.
Just like the idea that like it's...
Because you're absolutely right.
It's not, it doesn't feel like a TV show all the time, but like it does feel like this is like we acted out someone's live play of a D&D or a role-playing game. Right. Where like there are scenes where you're like, oh, we're focusing on this character and like here's their scene and like, yes, this is how that character advances. Like this is this player's moment. But the story is like not necessarily the best, right? Which is fine because D&D is always about contrived garbage, right? Like it's always about, my D&D campaign is just the X-Men, but with the serial numbers rubbed off, or whatever, right? But there's enough moments where I enjoyed it because like, oh, this is a fun, this is a fun story. But other times I was like, oh, but this isn't like a good show. Although, actually, let me rephrase that. I've also reevaluated my perspective on what is a fun show to watch. Like I've actually the idea
Wait, that you made it sound like this show like made you step back and go like, whoa, what is fun?
No,
really?
No. No, I did certainly not. But I actually, I always joke about when I watched Lost, 10 years ago, and someone told me, hey, when you watch this show, watch it from the presumption that this is a tabletop RPG gone fucking sideways, and gave me a lot of context where I actually really enjoyed it. But not for the reasons the writers thought. And actually, I suspect this is what Willow is. Like, I enjoyed it, but not for the reasons the writers thought. Right? Like, this wasn't... I didn't... I had a fun time watching it, but not because it was a great fantasy show or a great follow-up to the movie, but because, in my mind, this was just a tabletop role-playing game turned into a TV show. Where some of the stuff that normally we'd say, oh, that's bad writing, I'm like, oof, that's actually, you had a troublesome player or whatever, right? Or like, oh, your GM really phoned it in this session.
Yeah. In contrast, there's no secret. Like, I think there's like 4 franchises that are like, that make up my soul. There's the X-Men, right? There's no doubt about that. There's Highlander. We could probably throw the Transformers in there. But like the weird, like emotional one is Willow.
Which is funny because it's not a franchise until now.
No, until now, right? It's something I saw when I was 8 years old when it came out. I was really excited to see it. I have no real penchant for fantasy.
Which we've discussed, right? Like, you've never
been into fantasies per se. Like, I like Final Fantasy. But yeah, I'm not a fantasy guy. But Willow was just for some reason, when I was 8 years old, it connected with my little brain, and I loved that world to the point where I understand my nostalgia is stronger than my logic, and it's a silly, fun fantasy film. But for me, there were enough like hooks there to like, oh, they mentioned this old war in this place, and like, oh, we went to this castle, and like, oh, there's clearly stuff that happened there. There's enough design there to make it seem like a world with a history, with cultures that worked and interacted with each other, to the point where like that was my fantasy world that I loved, whereas other people have Middle Earth or Game of Thrones or whatever, right? That was my jam. And so but I've never really, unlike what I've done with the X-Men, maybe even Highlander, definitely Transformers, where I've never taken the time to sit and like try to look at it academically and try to rationalize it, because I think exactly for what you said, it's not a franchise. No one's iterated on it, and there's nothing to really compare it to aside from my memory of being a child. I would say I've probably now done that because we have this TV show. Mm-hmm. And the thing is this, because I hate to say it, I think we're going to talk about more, I don't want to say negatives, but like missed marks than we are positives. But the thing that I think the thing that both you and I completely agree with, and I think something that carries through the entire show, that first episode is really good. It's a really good opening.
Yes. Mostly
because it has a good balance between, action, fantasy, and fun, and that's just something I think we should talk about with the show, but also just in a broader perspective. What makes it unique as a show from the first episode, and again through the entire series, is that it shows that fantasy can be fun and lighthearted. Something that hasn't really been around because Game of Thrones broke everything, right?
Or at least recently, right? Like, and honestly, Witcher also.
Oh, sure, yeah.
Real serious, right?
But even like the Lord of the Rings movies, sure, the
and apparently
the first
TV
one,
show, which I've not seen.
Well, that, but like the movies, Fellowship of the Ring is fun and bouncy, but everything after that is like hard fantasy, war and destruction and apocalypse, and never really comes back from that. So yeah, like fantasy, popular fantasy tends to lean into dark, depressing dreariness, and this one was actively not doing that, which I think is something that deserves praise, and something that if anybody takes anything from this is like, if it does well, I would say hopefully it opens a door to more of that. Yeah, and I know that's something you specifically commented on when we were first talking about it through text messages and whatnot. The sort of like, hey, it's fun. This doesn't happen very often.
Right. Well, definitely when the first episode came out, I was like, ooh, this is fun. I may like Willow now, right?
Right.
It's been 8 episodes. My opinion is different now, but
what we can go from there is also, let's just kind of focus on the good stuff. As a Willow fan,
it's got Willow. Right?
It's got Willow. I mean, does it? But that's a different. But one of the things I really liked about it is the characters. They did introduce a really interesting, diverse cast of characters that were, especially at the beginning of the show, were really fun to follow and watch. Which character do you think stood out the most for you, at least at the beginning? Which ones were you most interested in sort of seeing how their story unfolded?
I actually found that the characters I was most interested in were the ones that weren't like the main characters. Like, I think in the last episode, I was like, oh, I like Graydon. I like...
Is that the prince?
Yeah, the prince. I like the sidekick to, or the defender of the princess,
Jade.
Jade, and I liked Borman. I was like, I like all these like the weird like, not tertiary but secondary characters to a certain extent, right? Not Willow, not the kids of Madmacguffin. Like, I like these other characters, and I think even by the end, that was like the ones I was like, oh, I'm most interested in what they do. Even as I felt like sometimes the show wanted me not to care about them. Like, the show was like, no, the important characters are here. I'm like, are they really that important?
Well, I think that speaks to, my biggest problem with it. Let's just jump into this. Again, I don't think there's anything necessarily wrong with the premise. There's nothing necessarily wrong with the characters. To me, aside from... Before you kind of gave the insight of the entire experience, which is like, it's just a D&D campaign, right? It's just a live play, for lack of a better word. What it felt like to me was a first draft. Like, everything was kind of... I feel like I keep having to caveat. I like the characters, I like the basic premise, but the writing was really weird.
Yes.
We have a lot of characters. We have, I would say, maybe too many characters, but they weren't written in a way that to have distinct voices. I don't think we spent too much time cracking jokes and having action scenes with little stakes, so that a lot of the characters don't actually get to develop. They don't really have arcs, to the point where it just felt like Willow the Quip edition.
Well, it's funny. No, it's funny you say that. Not to interrupt.
No, please.
Actually, to interrupt, because I realized that. I think the characters to me that were the most interesting were the ones that actually had stuff. Right. Like when I think about Borman having this whole idea that like, oh no, he betrayed the Madmacguffin. He's actually like maybe a bad guy. He started the show in prison. Right. And we see some sort of development there. Right. Maybe not the best, but we see something. Right. Similar Jade, where we think she's just the loyal servant of Kit. But then we find out like, oh, actually you're apparently the daughter of
General Kale.
Yeah, right. So, like, there was something there. And then, of course, Graydon, where it's like, oh, you're just this douchey prince. Oh, but actually, maybe you're not. Maybe, you have some real stuff going on.
Right,
right. And I start to think that actually, like, wait, is the whole thing that the characters actually liked are the ones that had just the little bit of depth that the show could manage, right?
Right.
Because that's the best they could do. Like, honestly, the rest of the characters, by the end of the show, I was like, oh, Willow, Kit, and Eric. I was like, I actually don't care about you, but please continue to the next season, I guess.
I think they were written to be kind of all the characters, maybe Willow accepted, but I have problems with his writing in other ways. But like all the new characters were written to be kind of miserable all the time.
That's how writing works.
Most of their jokes were complaining. They were just kind of complaining about themselves or each other. And another part about the writing, I think this is going to sound like a really strange complaint, but like the one thing I noticed coming out of every episode, I'm like, there's so much talking. There was so much dialogue, so many jokes, and there's one specific incident that I think. Oh,
I'm sorry, Mr. Writer Man. Do you not like dialogue?
But no, I mean it was made into white noise because they all sounded the same. Everybody sounded the same, and so it's just everybody's and doing more telling than showing. And this happened in the final episode. This is really done in an amazing. This is illustrated in a very amazing way, where Borman and Graydon and Alora are trying to get inside this castle, basically, and there's this big dust storm coming towards them. And when you touch the dust, you turn to stone, I guess. And Borman gets turned to stone, right? He gets touched, and what he does before we literally see him turn to stone is he yells,
"Ah, shit, guys! I'm turning to stone!"
And then he turns to stone, and 1 second later, I'm like, and I'm just thinking, why did he say that? And obviously, that sounds like nitpicking, but I think it's indicative of a couple of things. One, it's just telling us something that's happening on screen. It's superfluous dialogue. Two, it's said so casually. It's like, oh, guys, come on. As if like, oh, guys, come on. I want to go to this restaurant instead of this one, right? It didn't relay the stakes or the seriousness or the importance of the moment. He thought he was dying because that's what probably happens when you turn to stone. And that's how it worked in the movie. Because of that, it said third, it sounds like a joke, but it's not funny. It's just expository. It's just one example of kind of everything I'm talking about here with the way the dialogue is just kind of, I don't know what it's doing. And I'm not even saying that like I could do this better. I'm saying this as like, as a viewer, I'm like, what are any of these characters saying a lot of the time? It was frustrating. It's just like everything was over-explained. Everything was very, very chatty. And like, there's nothing wrong with that. There are stories and there are occasions for that. The movie wasn't like that. And again, there's nothing wrong with that. It's just the movie wasn't dialogue heavy in this way. It seems like a style, and one could assume that that's the style from the movie because it's a show called Willow, and they're really trading on the fact that it's based on the movie. And when you watch the movie, it's very much not that. So actually, with that in mind, why did they decide to call it Willow? Or more specifically, why did they make this a sequel or a successor to the movie Willow? I don't think it really leaned on the movie much at all.
This is actually one of the things I thought about in I think the last episode, is it suggests that Willow is actually fucking done, right? Like there's a scene, spoiler, I guess, where he's like, nope, I'm going home. I care about my daughter more than this shit.
Right.
And
played by his actual daughter, by the way.
Right. And to a certain extent, I was like, oh, okay. Like, sure, but why is this show called Willow? Problem is that the movie was called Willow, right? Like, you can't
right.
make the series called Madmartigan's Kids.
I think you could. Because Willow,
then it's not the Willow franchise, right? It's the Madmartigan's Kids franchise.
And you can do that though, because Willow, despite having a cult devotion to it, is not a major franchise, or else we would have had other movies like that.
You're right. It's just one movie.
And so like you can just like, let's dip back into this world, but like let's just focus on Madmartigan's Kids.
Which is what they did, ostensibly.
But they called it Willow. Well, first, I mean, most is that aspect, that it was a show called Willow that wasn't about Willow. Well, it made me wonder a couple things.
Why do you like this show? No.
No. Like
teasing.
One, it made me wonder, like, was this rushed? Because, like I said, it felt like a first draft or like a second draft, right? Then it made me wonder, like, well, was Warwick Davis, obviously he's much older now. Was he unable or unwilling to, or did Disney perhaps say, like, well, he's old and we can't have him, we can't risk having him, like, be the center of a show. But then part of me, I think it comes down to writing, because for most of the show, Willow is just the exposition machine. When he talks, he speaks in paragraphs, and it's like, oh, okay, buddy, what are you doing here? Until the end, where they start doing some interesting stuff with him, like you said in that scene where he's like, you know what, F this noise. I'm like, oh, okay, now Willow's actually getting to do something, right? Aside from walking around with his wand, his staff, shooting it like a shotgun at villains.
I assume that's how sorcery works.
Yeah, it didn't in the movie. I mean, I'm just saying, it's a lot of weird decisions were made for this show.
Well, so I did see this. This is entirely something that's probably bullshit, but I remember seeing something where, because there was a Willow role-playing game.
Yes.
Which was about the world, right?
Yes.
And that the writers actually had that. Like they used it as a reference.
So Jonathan Kasdan, right, the son of Larry Kasdan, yeah, is the creator of the show, and he explicitly said the two main inspirations or sources for the show were the novelization of Willow, of the movie, and the role playing game. Ignoring the fact, and I'm not saying they were good or not, people actually seem to dislike him, that X-Men writer Chris Claremont wrote a 3-novel sequel based on stories by George Lucas, right? It's like, if anything, that's the official, at the time was the official sequel to Willow. But again, coming from an idea from George Lucas, but that was tertiary. That was like tangential, I think is what they said. But learning that, it does speak to, like, okay, that the way it sounds, the way it works kind of makes sense. Like, did the writer's room just make characters and...
and the idea that, like, it wasn't about Willow, it was about the world. Mm-hmm. Which is, like, also, if you're ever going to make a movie that you want to franchise, don't name it after a single character, right? Like, if you want this to be Star Wars, like, don't call it Luke Skywalker movie, because, like, guess what? When it's not about Luke Skywalker, that's a problem.
Right.
And I think that's, to a certain extent, I think that is... something that this, like, we're talking about that friction between, it's called Willow, but, like, Willow was not the focus of this story.
Right.
It was about the world he lived in.
I think Highlander suffers from a similar problem, right?
Again, well, shit.
How many immortal McLeods are there?
How many Scottish dudes are there?
Right?
Yeah.
And that's a good point. But it doesn't mean that they couldn't have had a Willow-focused story. And that's the thing. The movie is called Willow because the movie is about...
It's about Willow.
Yeah. Right?
He's just a farmer.
Like, I can go into this... I'm going to go into that a little bit later. But, like, it's about a character growing, right? Mm-hmm. A character being set against obstacles and surmounting those obstacles and winning. The heroic journey, for lack of a better word, right?
Oof.
It is sort of singular, and everything is kind of a foil to the character of Willow in that movie. But it's also classic George Lucas, right? They have a MacGuffin called a baby, whereas this one, the MacGuffin, I would say, is Madmartigan. He's the Madmacguffin. Well, I guess Madmartigan's son, Eric, right?
Right.
So there are two Madmacguffins there. But if they wanted to make like a Willow show, I feel like they made choices, and the choices they made are fine. But at this point, it's mostly about the new characters, Madmacguffin is you could make a new show and say, oh, their father was this well-known rogue that left them, and you didn't have to be Madmartigan. What I'm saying is, like, they had all these characters. It's about those characters. Why not just create an original IP and give Willow, make an 8-episode singular?
Do you know how? I'm sorry. Are you familiar with how Disney works? Or actually, not even Disney. How the business works, right? Like, actually, I think you're actually punching against something that feels relevant to last week to a certain extent. Right. It's like big corporations want to monopolize and make money off of the existing properties they have, no matter the cost. I do like what I will say in defense of the House of Mouse is that actually, like, I think the world that they present in the show, clearly they expanded that world.
Yes.
Over the movie, right?
And I liked it. I liked it a lot.
And that's the kind of thing where it's like, you know what? Like, whether this was a bad story or not, I would watch another, right? Like, if you had the story of Boorman doing dipshit things, I'll watch that, you know, like, or whatever.
Right.
Like, the world is like, it's an interesting fantasy world that is not as grim as most, you know, as you highlighted in the front end. So for me, it's like, oh, that's cool. And Disney has that now. Yes. Could they have done this as an original property? Could they have said, like, oh, here's new Disney Fantasy World? Sure. But guess what? We all got into it. We all watched it because it was called Willow. Right. And that's that's how the marketing machine works, right? Like, that's how the modern content media works, right? Like, it's all turning the crank on the, getting you to subscribe to the new shit because it sounds like the old shit.
Which led me to this question. Who is this show for? Because Willow, the movie, again,
it was for you and you alone.
Yes. The original movie is a fantasy adventure film, right? It's PG, and is made for 8-year-olds, right? And hopefully entertaining enough. And I would say it is entertaining for parents to not hate their experience while they sat there with their kids, right? Is this show for that demographic, but now? Right, I was going into it kind of expecting that. I didn't want it to grow up with me. I didn't want the serious grimdark version of Willow because that would be dumb. I'm like, okay, how are they going to get the 8-year-olds, 10-year-olds of today to kind of fall in love with this world, this premise, like it did when I was young? And I don't think it's for kids though, because they're cussing their brains out in this show.
Yes, it's not for kids. It's not.
But as we discussed, it's not for Willow fans because it's not about Willow.
It's probably for some Willow fan. I don't know, man. Right. Not all Willow fans are you.
Well, they should be, for one.
But actually, you're right. I don't know. I mean, for me, I think about the fact I just said I would watch another show. Right. I would invest in this world, and I did not approach this as a Willow fan. It's just, to me, it's Disney's fantasy world. Right. That's what this is now. Maybe, okay, don't call it Willow. Call it Tar Leesland. Whatever.
Lean. God, get your shit together, Andrew. Come on.
It's funny, like, how much shit I don't remember about, like, the details. It's a fantasy world, right? And to me, it's no less stupid than Lord of the Rings. Sorry, that's harsh. But yeah, like, it is just another fantasy world, but one that Disney owns.
So they're calling it Willow. What are they taking from Willow? How are they kind of making this a sequel? And I guess arguably they're not making a sequel. They're just expanding it. They're taking a left turn because aside from some music cues, they brought back James Horner to do some music. And the music's pretty good. I'm not talking about the weird fucking rock songs.
The weird rocks.
Jesus Christ. Come on. Like, especially the last episode. The song they played in the last episode, albeit problematic, is one of my favorite songs. But like, I'm watching the credits for Willow with illustrations of fantasy characters doing fantasy shit, and you hear someone say,
Yeah. I know it was bizarre.
What is happening? Again, that's not something they did in the original movie either. So I'm like, what are they pulling from? Or did they just ignore it?
Well, but where were all the songs from in the end credits? I feel like they were all from the 80s and 90s.
They were. Yeah. Some of them were like modern indie covers of 80s classic rock songs.
Right, but I feel like it was all for people that were our age.
Yeah, yeah.
But, man, Okay, so I'm going to hot take this.
Do it. Bring it.
George Lucas has a history of making movies that were about selling shit. Mm-hmm. And I suspect that at the end of the day, Willow was no different. Like, if he could have turned Willow into a bonkers Lord of the Rings-esque franchise where everyone was buying toys, or I'm sorry, Star Wars, actually. If he could have, sold...
Well, that's a more apt comparison.
Yeah, I know. I was fast-forwarding 20 years, but, like, if he could have turned Willow into a bullshit fantasy franchise that sold toys, I suspect that's what he wanted to do more than anything. You just happen to be the victim of thinking it was a really cool fantasy story, not just a toy commercial.
Honestly, right? It's the same problem that Transformers hit with kids, right? When like, oh, we just need to get rid of this line. Let's make a movie where they all die. And then all of a sudden, children of a generation are traumatized.
So here we are, 30 some years later.
Right. It's like, only 17 years in the story, but yeah.
But like just the idea that like, it's not quite the toy commercial it was or could have been, but it's still a bit of like, I haven't looked at what the
merchandising.
Merchandising. Sorry.
Merchandising. Yeah.
Right. Oh, blacked out on my Mel Brooks. But like, I don't know what they've merchandised on this, but I suspect they have.
They have made like retro styled toys that you can buy because my phone knows I love Willow for some reason, and so
it's like they want the toy.
Yeah, you can buy the Willow action figure. You can buy a prop replica of Cherlindria's wand. So I have all those things now. Just joking.
But I mean, so like, and that's not I don't want to dismiss the original story. It's just like Star Wars to me was actually always just a toy commercial. Mm-hmm. I like parts of it, but like when people say like, "Oh, it's this great film," I'm like, "It's a great toy commercial."
It can be both, though. Like that's the thing. Like
it can be both. Yeah,
as I've said with what I've said with Transformers is like the problem with Transformers as a toy commercial is that they hired writers, and writers like to tell stories, and stories tend to have theme, meaning, and effect.
And so I think to a certain extent, I think what we're seeing is a little bit of that, like just not the story that you or I expected. Although, like, given what we talked about last week, I think a lot about how much writers now, at least in this context, write in the, like, they write like they're writing a D&D story, like a Critical Role. Because Critical Role, right, like blows shit up, right? Like it sells tickets, it is the big thing. So like, hey man, what if we write a TV show that feels like a D&D campaign? Maybe not the best one, but like an okay one. Honestly, if I ran this D&D campaign, or not D&D because I hate D&D, I ran this Pathfinder campaign, I'd be like, that's pretty good. It's fine,
Should we bleep out anytime you say D&D?
No.
So
fine.
Let's just say we're running a campaign.
But like that's always the thing where like if I ran a game that felt like this, that'd be cool, Yeah. I'd feel good about it.
Should we hunt down the Willow source book?
No. I'm actually,
I'm going to eBay after this.
No. I do hope that they release some new stuff, whatever they do. Like I'd buy it. I'd like to read it.
It's a cool world. They've done their job. That's interesting though because I hadn't considered. The joke was that you made it. It sounds like a role playing, tabletop role playing campaign just filmed, but it would not surprise me. And this is what I think you're getting at. People at Disney are like, this Critical Role thing is doing gangbusters. Can we capitalize on that? Do you have a role-playing game? Not really. But do you have anything that is role-playing tangential? Like, we got Willow. That, you know what? That in that regard, all of a sudden, everything seems incisive and smart.
Well, and maybe not, right?
Right.
Maybe it actually wasn't popular. Maybe people don't like it, right? But at least the way it was presented, the way it was written, the way the characters came out. I mean, they needed like, oh, this guy. I mean, okay, I say this, I was like, oh, this guy was in prison, Borman. And I'm like, well, okay, but that's also how the original movie was, like, but also like just the way the characters kind of get introduced, the way they're like, oh, it's literally it's an adventure, right? They're like, oh, we have to go out. We have a motley crew of people that aren't really, maybe they're not friends. They're just kind of related or whatever. Like, but they have to go solve the mission. They have to go defeat the monster,
Yeah, but even then, it's a lot of the concepts seem a little half-baked. Whereas,
have you played D&D?
I am an apologist for Willow. I'm sorry. And I guess this is going to get to my main argument here, and I might be wrong, but it's my stance, my opinion here. Willow did something that I think was really interesting in the face of popular fantasy at the time, right? Where we had Lord of the Rings, we had the animated stuff. In the 80s we also had like Dragon Slayer and
there's
all
a lot
these
of garbage fantasy.
Right. But a lot of it was sword and sandal kind of stuff. And what Willow did that was interesting is like, yeah, it's not about Conan, right? It's about a farmer from a town of little people. And what is he doing? He's protecting a baby. Does he get a sword? No, he has a branch that's technically a wand, but it doesn't work. Which gets to like, what is Willow about for me, and why I think the show for me kind of missed the mark, is that it kind of ties into with why I connected so hard with the X-Men, is that ultimately what I think, especially when you look at the cast of the movie, ultimately what that movie is about the other, people who are othered. We have a non-traditional main character in the movie. We have an underrepresented character as the main, an underrepresented sort of demographic as the main character of the movie Willow, right? And he gets to be the hero instead of a joke. To me, after thinking about the movie, is ultimately about giving someone who's normally characterized as an other the chance to be a hero and to specifically win through non-traditional heroic means, right? It doesn't come down to like, okay, well, he wants to be a wizard, so how does the movie end? He has a big wizard showdown with the evil sorceress. No, he does the disappearing pig trick. And Bavmorda, she beats herself because she can't believe that a farmer could do this, right? But there is a big wizard sorcerer fight that happens right before Willow saves the day through non-traditional means. But if you think about it, that sorcerer fight is also non-traditional. One, it features two women,
right, being
the most powerful characters in this world as it's presented in the movie. And they're also older. Demographics that don't become the front-facing characters of an action movie. That the big final climactic fight is theirs. And of course, it gives me the chance to plug the genius of Gene Marsh. But again, it's another example of Willow upending expectations, presenting a non-traditional view on classic fantasy, using actors that aren't usually given that kind of stage. That's what I kind of come back to, and what I love about it. It's like, it's about these weirdos succeeding on their own terms and actually winning. The show, like, the main characters are the representation of privilege. It's a prince and princess, right? Mm-hmm. They are all powerful, important people from their society or societies. Even Borman, because he's a special prisoner that they don't want to let out in the dungeon of the castle. And he used to travel with, I guess, with the king, who I guess is what Madmacguffin was after he and Sorsha got married. And the two main characters of the movie are a farmer and a guy who was just left to die in the middle of nowhere, just hanging there in a cage. The two most unimportant and perhaps unimpressive people that we could follow. Mm-hmm. If we're going to carry anything over from the movie, it should be that, like, let's give the underrepresented a chance to be heroes in their own way. Mm-hmm. And I don't think it really does that. It does put on screen underrepresented demographics, and that's good to see, and it doesn't treat them as was weird, but like, we see the Nelwyns, right? Willow's people.
Right.
And in the movie, when we see them for the first time, they're having a festival, and it's just like any other festival you've seen. They're having fun. There's kids. There's people joking around. There's people drinking. There's people watching entertainment. When we see his people in this show, they're dumb. It's Willow going like, they buy this every time. His people are there to look stupid so that Willow can quip, so that the other characters can quip, and they're never really seen again. And like, what an 180 from what the movie's, I would say what the movie's about, but what the movie did at the very least, which is like, let's shine a light on people who are normally made into monsters or jokes and show them instead that they're normal and that they're heroes. In that sense, I feel like the movie is like a love letter to Warwick Davis because of all the work he did for George Lucas.
Well, and I've actually heard that was...
Yeah.
Whether it's true or not, I've actually heard that was the whole point, right?
It was like just 18 or 21 when he made that movie too. Like, what an incredible experience, right? And to me, the show ignores what I think the most important aspect of the movie is. And not saying that it can't do that. I'm not saying what it does isn't important, but man, it needed another draft. But as a Willow fan, I kept coming back to every episode excited. I loved how they expanded the world generally. And yeah, am I going to sit down excited for season 2? Yes. Right? Because I'm an Uber fan and will do anything to get more Willow, even if he's just a character on the sidelines. End rant.
And I think it's a valid observation. I think we approach it from the idea that we don't even know what this show was, who the target audience was, like what the intent was. And was it perfect? No. No.
Yeah.
In fact, my big concern is that a lot of people are going to be like, the show was bad or the show was disappointing. And in a number of ways that we've sort of touched on, I feel bad. I want to see the next season. I do. Mostly
apparently 3 seasons are planned, right?
Right, but that's what I think they had a little promo image or whatever.
Yeah. Well, the last shot because it's all kind of the frame narrative was like they're reading a book. They put the book back on the shelf and there's 3 books, 3 volumes. I'm just like, I think in a message to you quite a bit where like the character of Graydon, who is played by the same actor who plays Flash in the Spider-Man movies. Yeah. Like, I was excited that I was like, oh man, he seems like a good kid. I don't want him to be a dipshit, like, because like in Spider-Man, he's kind of like this obnoxious character. So I was like, all right, let's see him go places, and like to see him like have a moment where leading up until the last episode, it's like, oh look, it's an arc. Right, like he grows into he's going to be a sorcerer, and then to be like there's a scene where, again, spoiler, where it looks like he just gets killed. Yeah, and I was actually like, well, fuck, like, welp, I guess that and of course, oh no, he's actually poofed into the bad world or whatever, and he's going to be part of the next season. I'm like, oh. Okay. Like, actually, I remember watching as we see, Eric and Kit walk away at the end of the episode. I'm like, guess what? I don't think I care about either of you. I care about the dude that's in the other world, Yeah. I want to see the next season. I hope they make it. I assume they will. Right. For all the doom and gloom here, I think there is a lot of good potential here. Right. It sounds like one of my grade reports from elementary school. There's a lot of potential in terms of the tone. And I found plenty of things to like in each episode. Like, if it was just a bad show, we probably wouldn't be talking about it. Yeah. It's that there's a lot of good stuff peppered throughout and a lot of potential, but it just seems to fumble on the follow through. I was just like exploring more of this world. Like, I'm kind of in. It feels like they did a lot of work. They just put the effort in the wrong department. Right? Most first seasons of things are wobbly and have problems. And this is no different. Mm-hmm. So, Willow, it happened. It was okay. And I'll say it again. The best of Laura Dannon on TV right now is on Reservation Dogs.
For you to admit that.
So if you, dear listeners, have any thoughts about the topic we discussed this week, feel free to leave your thoughts as comments on the page for this episode at forallintents.net.
You can also post your comments or engage in conversations with other listeners on our Facebook page.
You can find us on other social media as well. Andrew and I occupy different spaces so that you can find us where you need to. You can find me mostly on Instagram at Bethel Comics, and you can find Andrew at Mastodon. Oh, I wrote this down so I wouldn't have...
Oh, it's at Profane Dark at dice.camp. And I know because actually I've had weird people follow me, and I'm going to presume that you're listeners of the show. I don't think that's true.
Do you know who those people are, Andrew?
No.
Those are called fans.
Yeah,
they are fans of you. Well done. You're a celebrity now.
Mm-hmm. While you're at our website, forallintents.net, you can also take a look at our YouTube page, which you can find by clicking on the link in the corner that says YouTube. There you'll find our show, which we're also repeating there. And if you are listening to our show on YouTube, please like and subscribe, or as the kids like to say, ring that bell.
We use 2 tracks of music for our show. One is called Disco Medusae. The other is called District 4. And they're both written and performed by Kevin McLeod of the Clan McLeod, an immortal swordsman, graph paper enthusiast, and musician extraordinaire.
You can find his music at incompetech.filmmusic.io, and that's all licensed under the Creative Commons 4.0 Attribution License.
If you like the show and like to help us out, the best way to do so would be to subscribe to the show using whichever podcasting service you happen to use. What would help us out even more, though, would be to go to their storefront and leaving some sort of review. Whether a text review or using their proprietary metric will help spread the word to new potential listeners through the magic of algorithms. Andrew, you touched on it by accident.
Oops.
During our discussion about Willow, but you brought up Mel Brooks. And a trailer came out this last week or last weekend that no one was expecting.
No one was expecting.
Or wanted?
Like, that's actually fair.
History of the World Part 2.
Right.
We always want to know what happens next.
So, for those that don't know, Mel Brooks made History of the World Part 1 in, what, the 70s? Late 70s?
Yeah, something like that.
It ended with a next time, or whatever, like History of the World Part 2. And then that movie was never made. But apparently now it's being made as a series?
I don't think it was expected to be made. It was just a joke, right? Because he doesn't do sequels. He did the same thing in Spaceballs, right?
Right. But it's a joke. But it's a joke, right? Like, it's also a joke. Was it 81? Oh, okay.
1981, yeah. So basically late 70s.
But it's just like there's now a trailer on Hulu, I believe, right?
Yeah, and it's going to be it's a series. Is it a series?
I think it sounds like it's a mini series, right?
Yeah,
it's like 3 or 4 episodes,
and being released on Hulu.
And it's got like this weird motley crew of comedians that are all just like, which is like, as Mel Brooks is wont to do, right?
Yeah, it was, as was the case with Part 1. Like, honestly, Part 1, that movie is just like a sketch comedy, like a history-based sketch comedy, which the thing is, like, do we need this in a world where something like Drunk History exists, right? I don't know if you've seen it.
And so, actually, that's what I was thinking about that, because I was like, oh, it probably has a lot of overlap with Drunk History. And to a certain extent, like, clearly Drunk History works. This is just Drunk History without the drunk, right? Like, it's just the bad joke history, which, you know what? That, like, the original was fun, and let's see where they go. I mean, already having seen some of the trailer, like, there's some jokes in there I laughed at, right?
Yeah.
The idea where you see, like, Union soldiers walk up, they see this black woman who walks out with a rifle, and it's like, Harriet Tubman, and they're like, oh, the inventor of the bathtub. And I laughed. Like, that's stupid, but I laughed.
It's interesting, because it also puts to the test Mel Brooks and his style of humor. Does it work in a 2023 context?
And people like to talk about that because he has some, and we'll see, right? Like, I suspect that actually, my instinct is actually his humor probably will work. Like he's probably learned to shave off the old jokes,
right.
The ones that didn't work,
right.
But we'll see.
I think it's weird because I think Mel Brooks has kind of been sanitized, not him per se, but his work, because we've had musical versions and of his movies and film versions of the musical versions of the movie. So he's kind of become, like I said, institutionalized. He's become he's a wise elder that we turn to. I'm like, no, he makes
raunchy shit.
What did my dad say about Mo Brooks? You never found another comedian who's worked so hard to lower the bar.
But at the same time, like all these things you talk about, like the musical and the whatever, he's involved with all of them.
Yes, absolutely.
Right. That's the thing. Like it is like, what if we kept giving a comedian a chance to update his legacy, essentially?
And they wouldn't, honestly, he wouldn't be involved if either he felt like he still didn't have something to contribute, or honestly, corporations or investors being involved, if they felt he didn't have something to contribute. Right.
So I actually suspect that it will not feel like a 70s Mel Brooks.
No.
It won't.
Probably for the best.
Right. A lot of ways. But we'll see. I am actually, having seen the trailer, I was like, this is not something anyone expected, but I'm very excited to see it.
Yeah.
Because I think there's something about his humor that works for me, and to see him now as the very oldest man who's clearly like willing to update his humor.
It'll be cool to see like an adaptation where again the original director, the original writer is on board, which actually that was also the case for Willow. Ron Howard was the director of that. He was an executive producer, and the original writer of the movie was a writer on the show. So I don't know. Nothing makes sense. The world is upside down.
Deep breath, calm down.
So until you calm down, dear listeners, I'm D. Bethel.
And I'm Andrew Asplund.
And for all intents and purposes,
that was a podcast.
Our first pizza merch. For all intents and purposes, branded pizzas. Frozen pizzas. Let's clap first. Actually, we should probably clap. Is that how that works?
Yes.
Okay.
Give it to me, baby.
That sounds like fun. I'll throw the link in the chat just for kicks and shiggles. Shiggle sounds like a really bad word. I don't ever want to say that word out loud ever again.
See your doctor if shiggles applies to you.
Oh, God, no.